Hello everybody. Those of you familiar with Toitū will know that one of our star attractions is this interactive cottage, which is a replica of a house erected in the heart of Dunedin by one of the early European settler families. For today's Talking Pictures, I've gone hunting through our art collection for images of other early European settler homes in Otago. And here's one of the very earliest. This sketch shows the home of surveyor Charles Kettle and his family, perched down by what was then the water's edge in central Dunedin. Rather than go into any detail about this building here in Talking Pictures, I'll leave you to check out what my fellow curator Sean had to say about it in episode 3 of Curator's Corner. The Kettles also developed a suburban estate on the slopes above the centre of town, and a farm in South Otago. The suburban property was named Littlebourne. This is where Charles Kettle passed away in 1862 after contracting typhoid. This house was the residence of one of Kettle's assistants, Charles Palaszczuk. After Palaszczuk left, it became the home of policeman and resident magistrate Alfred Strode, and by the time this illustration was made in 1853, it was occupied by Anglican minister Reverend John Fenton. Speaking of the clergy, here's the building erected to serve as the manse for Reverend Thomas Burns and his family. It had been prefabricated in the UK and was shipped out with the first tranche of settlers in 1848. The building had been the subject of a bizarre incident at the beginning of the voyage out to Otago. A London carpenter, aggrieved that he hadn't received final payment for his work making the kit set, obtained a writ for the arrest of Captain William Cargill, the leader of the Otago settlement scheme. Cargill had already set sail for Otago, but unfortunately for him, the John Wycliffe had to call into Portsmouth for repair of damage sustained by rough seas encountered in the English Channel. That enabled the writ to be served upon him while the ship was delayed there. Cargill had supposedly understood that final payment didn't need to be made until the manse had been erected in Dunedin, but the carpenter claimed otherwise, and Cargill ended up paying the outstanding sum out of his own pocket. For more on the story of the manse, check out episode 2 of Curator's Corner. Thomas Robertson and his family were passengers on the Philip Lang in 1848 along with Burns. Because preparations to receive the passengers at Dunedin hadn't been completed when the Philip Lang arrived, most of the immigrants remained on the ship for 6 weeks while they waited for barracks to be built. But not so for Thomas Robertson and his second wife Elizabeth. Thomas was a bricklayer and a stonemason, and his services were in hot demand. He was employed to add chimneys to Kettle's cottage and to Burns's manse. Meanwhile, Elizabeth took in washing, and by the time the rest of the passengers came ashore, the Robertsons had earned themselves a tidy sum to get them started in Otago. Thomas then began constructing the first stone buildings in the settlement: a house for Burns at Grant's Braes, a stone store for Johnny Jones, the first schoolhouse, and so on. Earnings from all this work eventually enabled the Robertsons to take up land at Anderson's Bay and Tomahawk. This painting shows their Anderson's Bay residence on the right, looking out over the South Dunedin flat. Here it is again from the opposite direction. Soon after building this house at Anderson's Bay, Thomas Robertson was engaged to build a house for Alexander Chalmers at Halfway Bush. This meant he had to leave home between 4 and 5 a.m. each morning to walk from Anderson's Bay to Halfway Bush. Even in his 90s, it was said that he didn't think twice about walking all the way from Anderson's Bay to the centre of town and back. He passed away here in 1895 at the ripe old age of 98. This view of the house by J.D. Perrott appears to have been painted the year before Robertson's death. Here's another 1848 dwelling that Sean has talked about previously in Curator's Corner. It's the residence of Archibald and Janet MacDonald and family, who also arrived on the Philip Lang. The painting is by draftsman and lithographer David Henderson. Henderson also drew cartoons, and this picture may have been drawn as a cartoon to lampoon the MacDonalds following an incident that took place here in 1859. One of the MacDonald's chickens straight into their neighbour George Crawford's wheat field, so Crawford shot it. In retaliation, Archie MacDonald took the dead hen and beat George Crawford over the head with it. That sparked an all-in brawl between the families, and the dispute ended up in court. But after hearing both sides, the magistrate dismissed the case. This house in North East Valley was likewise the setting for a dispute that ended up before the magistrate in 1859. The house belonged to Sinclair Harold, who had arrived with his brother James and their wives on the Benicia in 1848. James Gebbie, a gardener in North East Valley, claimed that on the 24th or 25th of March 1859, a quantity of apples had been stolen from his property. He believed the apples were concealed in a portion of Harold's house, occupied by two young women. A search warrant was issued, and the apples were found. It turned out that the apples had been given to the women by two drunken men who had stayed the night with Sinclair Harold. So the women and their brother were charged with receiving stolen goods rather than having taken them. They escaped with a stern telling off from the judge, as it couldn't be proven that they had known the apples were stolen. We're heading up to North Tyree for our final cottage. This is the residence of Alan Boyd. He and his brother John arrived from Scotland on the Multan in 1849, and in 1851 or 52 built this cottage. Both would become well-known sheep farmers in the district. This view of Alan's house was painted in 1909, likely from this photograph. That's Alan pictured standing out in front, in both the painting and the photograph. He passed away in 1913, aged 90, and his sons donated the painting to the museum 2 years later. Alan Boyd was lucky to make it to 90. In 1855, he was out on the farm hunting pigs when the trigger on his rifle got caught on some scrub. The contents of the rifle were discharged into his side and through his lungs. The newspaper in Dunedin reported that little hopes were entertained of his recovery, but miraculously he did survive. 40 years later, Alan again diced with death. He was driving home in a buggy with his shepherd when his horse was spooked by a passing train and bolted. The shepherd was thrown from the buggy and was killed. Alan Boyd was charged and convicted of being drunk in charge of a horse and buggy. He was fined £2, while the owner of the hotel, where he'd been served liquor when he was drunk, was fined £5. And on that sobering note, we'll say see you next time, and thanks for watching.